Welcome to SpunTales.com, where we spin tales from around the web. This week we continue the story, The Falling by J.D. Phillips. The Falling is now on Amazon and was provided to SpunTales with permission to read on air. Be sure to follow the author on her socials at facebook.com/authorjd and twitter.com/JD_author. He frowned after her as she walked out of the room. He didn't know what anywhere meant any more than he knew where he'd come from in the first place. But he couldn't help but doubt the accuracy of Mira's statement. Instinct retained what memory had not, after all. And his instinct warned that there were more places far more grim than this room. Places he knew he did not want to rediscover. Places he'd worked hard to leave as far behind as possible. The uneasiness nipped beneath the skin and caused the hairs on his arms to stand at attention. Something pressed against the outermost edge of his thoughts. A memory, perhaps, or a message he'd heard once before. But he wasn't able to reach out and take hold just yet. It hovered for only a few seconds, whispering against his inner ear, and then flittered off as quickly as it came before he could make any sense of it. A woman carrying a breakfast tray arrived not too long after, and placed it upon the side table by his bed with a quick smile and a nod. She turned and went back out before he caught her name, in a hurry to get all of her deliveries done, and slightly wary of him. Fresh gossip had breezed through the corridor since the last of the ambulances had left, this time carrying word that he had been the last patient Dr. Dunrow had saw before her apparent breakdown. He was somewhat disappointed he hadn't had a chance to speak with the woman, but the tray she'd left at least provided him with a much-needed distraction. He recalled the names of the different foods discussed the night before, but none had meant much to him at the time. Looking at the food before him, he now wished that he'd put more thought into things, as the triangular pieces of bread, the lumpy, scrambled eggs, and the circular meat patty didn't look particularly appealing. He found the eggs especially unpleasant as he timidly poked at them with the provided plastic fork. A solid clump of rubbery yellow goop with a smell that reminded him of sulfur. He had to practically cut apart with his fork. He tried and failed more than once to place a bite into his mouth and see if the eggs tasted better than it looked. He surrendered with a sigh, and decided to try the toasted bread next. Light tan in color, slightly crispy on the outer edges only. He found the bread bland, but bearable. He nibbled slowly, one bite after another, until each of the triangle slices were gone, and he felt an unexpected swell of satisfaction as his stomach raised no immediate objections. He passed on the meat patty, and ate a fair amount of fruit from the small bowl to help pass the next block of time. Some pieces he truly liked. Others barely had any taste at all, but he made sure none remained. Though no one had said as such, he assumed eating was also some sort of test through which he'd be judged, and he wanted to do well enough to get more items crossed off Logan Pam's list. His stomach, thankfully, remained agreeable as they moved on to a small container of peach-flavored yogurt. He didn't care for the yogurt's texture or taste, but he ate it all regardless, focusing only on the importance of doing well in the eyes of his doctor. His stomach made a few questionable gurgles, but again cooperated for the most part until he'd emptied the container, and he'd felt he'd done a satisfactory job of consuming his meal. Job completed. He unfortunately had little else to do now but wait for someone else to come into his room for one reason or another. The urge to climb out of bed and explore was strong. He'd yet to see the bathroom Rita mentioned, or take more than a few steps from the bed to the chair and back again. It wouldn't be a long walk, he reasoned. He could always use the wall to steady himself once he'd moved away from the bed. Simple, and best of all, no need to call Mira back into the room. The gown and blanket both grated against his legs as he pushed them aside and slid his legs over the edge of the mattress. But he found the floor a great deal more welcoming thanks to the socks Rita had given him when she'd first put him to bed. Standing upright made his head spin for a few seconds, and then he was free to step away from the bed completely. Walking proved a laborious process as his trunk and limbs swayed and flailed and threatened to buckle out from underneath them. He had to focus every step of the way. Right foot forward, step down. Left foot forward, step down. But eventually, he figured out how to maintain his balance while in motion, as well as standing idle. He let out a relieved sigh when he finally reached the restroom without falling even once. The sigh was cut short when his presence triggered the motion sensor and caused the light above a small sink to click on, startling him as well as assaulting his eyes. He remained in the doorway, covering his eyes with his hands, until the pain became tolerable enough he could take a look around the room. Again, the term restroom struck him as puzzling. The only thing he saw remotely resembling a chair was made of hard porcelain with an open seat above a bowl of water, and it didn't look that comfortable. Across from it was a narrow stall fitted with a metal spout fashioned from the same shiny silver as the sink's faucet. A towel and a bottle of soap set near the sink. And that, much to his disappointment, was that. He took a step forward and caught movement from the corner of his eye, and did a brief double take when he realized he'd stepped in front of a small square mirror above the sink. The face staring back at him wasn't any less strange than before, but there was at least some level of recognition now. It was the same face he'd seen in the glass, and later in the mirror on the other restroom. It was the same face Officer Patrick had tried his best to take a picture of. It was the same face everyone he'd met so far had come to know him by. This was his face. His reflection. One of the many pieces that went toward the whole of who and what he was. He moved away from the mirror, never once glancing back to see if his reflection did the same, and turned his attention to the porcelain seat. The thing Rita wanted him to use the night before. He understood this, and knew what the thing was without any idea as to exactly how he knew. He couldn't remember ever having used one before, and he didn't think he needed to use one now. And yet, instinct warned using toilets was probably another one of the things on Logan Pam's list. After a few minutes of staring, he decided to be bold and pressed the silver button in the center of the toilet's tank. The whoosh of water swirling down the drain as a result made him cringe and gasp, and then, as he watched the fresh water return to fill the bowl, smile. He flushed it twice more, studying the water as it swirled about each time, before he shifted to focus on the stall. He saw a handle mounted on the wall, and pulled on it. He nearly lost his balance in haste to jump away from the sudden deluge of water raining down from the shiny spout above his head. He remained there, leaning against the wall, watching the water fall, for quite some time. Something about the sound of water pounding on the floor as well as the steam rising up off of it was not only familiar to him, but soothing as well. The warmer the room became, the thicker the steam gathered around him. The more at peace he began to feel until his eyelids threatened to lower on their own. Using the wall as support, he slid down to the floor and sat there, enveloped by steam with his eyes closed and mind blissfully occupied by the pitter-spatter of water bearing down upon the tile. He couldn't be sure if this was by chance the reason the term restroom had been invented, but it certainly made sense to him in the moment. He could happily rest here indefinitely. Thank you for listening to SpunTales.com. SpunTales is a Heathen Digital podcast. If you have a podcast or would like to start a podcast on the Heathen Digital Network, send us an email at info@heathendigital.com. Be sure to check SpunTales out on their socials at facebook.com/SpunTales and twitter.com/SpunTales. Thanks for listening.